Good morning. The fact that all of you are here reflects on the civility of this city. You wouldn't see these crowds in Delhi unless it was outside an ATM or outside Parliament waiting to become an MP. So thank you for spending your Sunday morning with one of perhaps the world's finest journalists, who obviously rose to the ranks of being one of the best known, most accomplished editors. But I think the Tina Brown that we need to know is the Tina Brown who stands up for what is right and not for what is popular. Lessons that she can impart, and we'll have this conversation today, is lessons that even some sections of our media perhaps need to imbibe, which is that at times it is popular to be unpopular as long as you can take the right call for the right reasons. So without further ado, Tina, the US disappointed everyone except for the Trump family largely. So why do you think Donald Trump won? And you know, someone said, oh, Modi also won. So let's not give people that reason. But what happened with the US elections?
Well, thank you, Suhel. It's wonderful to be here. I'm just so impressed that India loves these Litfests so much that, you know, the desire to listen to writers and world of ideas is remarkable and exciting. I heard that there were 90 Litfests in India.
It's also free.
And also free, but they could
and
be...
air-conditioned.
So, I mean, it has been an asteroid that has hit the United States. If you live in one section of it, of course, but not in the other, where Trump was, let's face it, widely embraced. I do think that Trump is a sort of apotheosis of celebrity culture reality show meeting the popular discourse in what Plato called, you know, the late stage democracy. Because what we're seeing is how everything about what Trump did, when you look back now, you understand why he did win. I mean, the reality show that he put on, you know, when you saw his family tramp across the stage, the girls with the long legs and the blonde hair, the models, the Melania with the sunglasses, Trump, the rich guy with the quivering Elvis quiff or whatever it is he has, and the planes and the gold tower. This is what so many people aspire to. You know, it's hard for mass America to understand or get excited and turned on to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. You know, it's a nerd's world. It's a coding world. It's a guys with hoodies, pale white guys with hoodies writing code. That's not the Playboy Mansion kind of a exciting, you know, high testosterone kind of success that people really identify with. There's something deeply 80s about the image of Trump. And that's an era where so many people want to go back. They feel they understand that. Whereas the post-globalization, post-digital world is a very alienating kind of a thing, which people can't get their hands on. So for Trump, it was this really worldly image that he presented of success with a capital S. And you lie that with his gift for tiny vocabulary, you know, pronouncements that appall anybody who expects something more in the world of ideas or has an ability to communicate policy or all of the things that normally we turn to for a president. The fact that he can't and doesn't and won't seems to have really resonated this time with the United States. And he was very accurate in identifying the left behind man. I mean, he was. And they have been left behind. I mean, there is a reason and the genuine grievances that Americans ought to have, you know, about the inequity of their current world. It's grotesque. I mean, they feel completely abandoned after the 2007-8 financial crisis. They've never really felt made whole. And as the world moves on and leaves them further behind, and as, you know, the whole kind of obsession with minorities as they see it gets all the play. I mean, Black Lives Matter gets much more attention than the grievances of the white working class. And there are many who feel that, you know, that Hillary kind of abandoned that demographic really in her campaign, in a sense. So all of these things have led up to the coming of the great golden man.
I want to come back to Hillary, since you know her incredibly well in a bit. But let's just stay with Trump for a moment. In India, it's widely believed no one wins an election, you lose an election. So the Congress lost the last election. Vajpayee ji lost the election which he did in 2004. In America, it's slightly different. Now, there is a worldview out there that because Trump was not one of them, the New York Times mindset jettisoned him well before and therefore misread the tea leaves and didn't actually imagine what was going to happen. Do you believe certain biases of intellectualism often creep into everyday psephology, where you're actually predicting what's going to happen, but your intellectualism prevents you from seeing the reality and instead makes you judge things rather than actually reflect on them?
Well, many things. Well, first of all, we should not forget that Hillary did win the popular vote, though, by 2.5 million. I mean, really did win. That's huge. That's never before really been seen. We have not seen someone who lost the Electoral College win so many of the popular votes. So clearly, it is not a mandate that Trump has. The misreading of the tea leaves, I actually also ascribe to the enfeebled state of media today. We are seeing more and more that TV and media spend their time looking at polls as opposed to doing the reporting. And the anecdotal reporting would have told you so much that Trump was winning. I mean, the forests of Trump signs on lawns, and then they're looking at polls and say, but the polls say this. Something has really gone wrong with polling. One thing I think has gone wrong is that Trump brought out many voters who hadn't voted before. So they weren't in the data, A. And secondly, I think that polling itself has been seen to become a sort of liberal elite activity. People just don't tell the truth to polls. I came to decide in my own kind of anecdotal polling that anyone who said they didn't know how they were going to vote was always a Trump voter. The secret Trump voter who had felt shamed by the elite media into not thinking that they had a vote. And I do think you're right about the condescension. There was a lot of condescension towards the Trump voter and the white working class in general. They're not the focus, in a sense, of media outrage in any way. People will get much more excited about, transgender bathrooms than they will about working class, middle America. And that's one of the reasons that the Trump voter became so angry, in a sense, is a feeling that they're what Hillary Clinton called the basket of deplorables. She didn't use that term about the white working class as so, but in a way, that's what they felt they've been treated as, a basket of deplorables. And it's the revolt of that feeling, if you like.
But as someone who's seen the world at such close quarters and with several hats, two things seem to have happened. Number one, we're in an age of rage. Everyone's angry about everything. I mean, you have a Duterte in Philippines, you have a Kim in North Korea, you have Putin. There's a lot of anger at the top, there's a lot of anger at the bottom. We've experienced that rage even in India. And, people call it tolerance, intolerance. I don't want to get into that debate. This is the Times of India Literature Festival, which is meant to be non-controversial and relaxing and calming. But why do you think this is happening? Why are people so angry? And it cannot be just economic inequality.
Well, again, I go back, Andrew Sullivan did write this very brilliant piece in the New York Magazine in May about this late-stage democracy issue and how Plato, if I get back to that, because it really struck me. This was in May, and I really read it again before I came, actually, and everything he said turned out to be true, that actually despotism comes out of late-stage democracy because at a certain point, democracy gets more and more the freedoms that it has, the freedoms that we love and applaud, escalate and escalate and escalate to the point that there's hardly any common bonds, that everybody has a say, everybody has a voice, the elites become more and more attacked, the intellectualism is outlawed. I mean, when you had Michael Gove in the UK saying about Brexit, we don't care about experts anymore, what he was actually saying is we reject intellectual argument. People have had their own news feeds now for the last 4 years, so they choose their own news on Facebook. Now we've evolved into not just choosing your own news, but choosing your own facts. So that people now are so isolated within their splintered worlds, there isn't any common bond. At that point, it's all in meltdown and an anarchy takes over, and people are frightened of anarchy, actually. They are frightened of it, so they don't like it, actually. They don't like living in this world where everything goes, for instance, the culture wars have now been done. I mean, there are, the whole thing that used to bind Republicans together was, anti-gay marriage and all of these things. those fences have all fallen. So there's nothing left, in a sense, for them to feel they can sort of hang on to. Their churches are less populated. Their, the community bonds have been eroded by globalization and people moving away, and parents no longer living anywhere near their children, and all of these things. So people feel very isolated. They feel spiritually adrift. They feel then economically taxed, and at the end of it, they're left with feeling like they're nothing. They feel insignificant. That's at that moment that they start to hanker for the authority figure. And of course it can become, as we've seen, history repeats this again and again, then the authority figure can turn into this hunger for the despot. And we're now seeing this very worrying, wave that's happening. We may wind up with Marine Le Pen. We see a very, very right-wing candidate anyway in Fillon. We've seen Brexit happen, which stunned people there in the same way that Trump has here. And the stuff that Trump says is authoritarian to a degree that we've really not heard from an American president. I mean, he talks about, when he talked about, restoring torture, and if they argued, he'd just tell them to go do it. Now, thank God, General Mattis, the new Secretary of Defense, has already educated him somewhat on that. But his instinct is to say, I want it, I'm going to say do it, and they will just fall into line. This is new, and people are loving it, which is the anxiety.
But having said that, it is true that the White House does have a humbling effect once you enter it. So, the establishment, the DC bureaucracy will kick in, and hopefully there'll be some measures and controls. But I now want to switch to someone you know incredibly well, Hillary Clinton. In many ways, the Al Gore moment returned. In many ways. She, in an interview, I think it was about 6 months ago, said, I don't know how I can tell people who I am. She's been in the public eye for over 3 decades. Why don't people know her?
Well, I've come to the theory that it's very difficult for a woman in power of her generation to be who she is. You look at it a little bit the same with Theresa May, the Prime Minister in the UK, a very guarded person, a very shall we say, spontaneous kind of a leader. Hillary has had to wear so many masks over her life. She started off in Arkansas as the governor's wife there, when she was a feminist who had always been tipped to be a leader herself, but she followed, the hunky, high testosterone, brilliant redneck Bill Clinton to Arkansas as his wife, had to kind of pretend to be sort of a wife who baked cookies, which was not her at all. They didn't like her, they rejected her. She changed from being a blue stocking to having to look like a woman with dyed blonde hair who cared about, womanly things. All the way through her career, she's had to kind of put on another mask to hide the fact that she's an ambitious woman. And the interesting thing about Hillary is that when she's actually in power, as Secretary of State or as Senator, extraordinarily popular. When she seeks power, she's incredibly unpopular. The fact is that when women seek power, they're branded as ambitious, conniving. This is the stuff that's haunted Hillary. So although I would be loath to say that misogyny and gender is the reason she lost, I would argue that decades of misogyny and gender sort of reduction attributed in the end to the terrible scarring of her image, to the point that by the time she ran, I mean, she had been trashed for decades, and it's very hard to get rid of those scars. I actually came to feel in this election, after 15 months of her being attacked and trashed and pummeled, it was almost like the witches of Salem. I mean, you would feel that in that decade they would have bound her in a chair and dunked her in the river, and drowned her. There was a kind of a witch hunt. It was like, sink the bitch and sink the witch, and the words that were used about her is like, lock her up, and a kind of vengeful, let us not just defeat her, let us annihilate her. And on his victory tour even, Trump continues it. I mean, he was in his victory tour in Ohio. Where was the graciousness to the loser? What about, like, let's hear it for Hillary Clinton, who put up a big fight, lost, but, with honor? No, it's like, it was fun beating her, wasn't it? And they all shouted, lock her up. It was actually, I made my blood run cold, actually.
So here's the irony. You have Barack Obama, 2 terms, 55% approval ratings, the highest in almost 4 decades for any sitting president, about to relinquish office and his entire legacy in tatters, because this man, through his words, has already, and through his deeds, is going to do even more of the undoing of Obama. What do you feel about Obama, his legacy, his tenure? Because remember, one other incident that happened, or one statistic is, the highest amount of racial crimes also happened in a regime actually headed by a man of color.
Well, I think America has always had these advances and regressions throughout its history. You had the same thing after Reconstruction, when suddenly there was another backlash against black Americans. I think if Hillary had won, by the way, the misogyny would have been even worse after her, because there is the backlash that happened. So I think what we've seen with Obama is that those who are racist anyway were so offended by him being president that the backlash was even worse. Obama leaves by being personally incredibly popular. He has been a flawlessly elegant, wonderful orator, charismatic, and the first family has been one of the most exemplary we've ever seen in the White House. Michelle Obama is the most popular American woman, a fantastic mother, an icon. But you could also argue only is as popular as she is because she completely abandoned any attempt after when she ran. She got horrifically trashed when she made political comments. She never made another political comment when she went to the White House. She took over, the obesity campaign and was only ever photographed sort of jumping about on the Rose Garden, campaigning against obesity. She just basically said, I'm keeping my head down, supporting my husband, and now she's the most popular woman in America. So we have all of this incredible personal popularity. But a lot of what Obama did was very unpopular, I will say. He did an extraordinary achievement with his health care for many millions who were uninsured, but it was poorly rolled out. It was badly done. And a lot of people in business feel just really badly done and caused problems. So there's that. Obamacare is actually very unpopular, extraordinarily. His foreign policy has been too chin-scratching for most people. I mean, but Obama, the thing we love about Obama is his cool and his ability to see the wood for the trees. But sometimes he's so out there in his intellectual geopolitical thoughts that he doesn't emote any kind of outrage when there's an Islamic attack. Or, he just said he's going into Syria and then he's not. He makes an intellectual decision. These things don't play well. People find him too cerebral. So some of the things that he did, and also a sense that he did not really reach across the aisle. There's a lot of argument about that. The Republicans, right from the beginning, said, we're not going to work with this guy. But he also, I have to say, perhaps because he's never been an executive, he tended to think that when he said something should be done, it would be done. Doesn't realize as an executive that saying it's going to be done is the very beginning. You then have to wrestle it to the ground, and you have to co-opt people, and you have to get people on board, and you have to get them in a room. Bill Clinton was very, very good at that. Obviously, Lyndon Johnson was one of the best we've ever seen at that. He wasn't good at that, and he made very little effort to do it. So now he's now got an issue that his legacy looks like it could be overturned unless I don't know what, unless the Democrats regain the House and the Senate, which they have also lost. So it's a pretty dashing thing for Obama. One thing I will say about Obama that I really regret, in the interview right after after the election to David Remnick in the New Yorker, not one word did he say about Hillary Clinton. Not one word. I mean, I think it would have been nice and, again, elegant if he'd said, Hillary would have made a great president. I'm glad I campaigned for her. It's a tragedy that she lost. Nothing. So, she doesn't really get much support from anybody, is the truth. And I think that when she's gone from the public arena, I think she will be greatly lost. Oddly enough, young people feel so crushed, many of them. My son, has Asperger's, and he felt, he keeps saying, I miss her. And he saw her as his champion. Because people have become very, anybody with a problem in life, or any kind of a minority right now, feels very afraid of Trump. And that's the new thing. I mean, no one's ever used to feeling afraid of the American president. It may turn out not to be true, but he mocked people with disabilities. He's spoken with such harshness about Muslims and immigrants. People feel very afraid, and there's been a lot of traumatic reaction from young people, schools. They're afraid. They feel he's going to hurt them in some way. As you said, I don't think he actually will, and you spend your time now reassuring younger people that there are checks and balances, and most of this was rhetoric and so on. But the rhetoric bit, it really bit, and left a very traumatized level of people in the electorate.
But it's interesting, and let's just talk about this. Over the years, I mean, you had the Martin Luther King moment. Of course, I'm not even going back into Jackson and Lincoln, blah, blah, blah. America suddenly has returned to what I would imagine a level of cerebral brutality. The strident positions, echoed by Cheney and Bush saying either you're with us or against us. We're seeing that in large parts across the world. There's a lot of strident positions that people are taking in order to protect national, local, regional identities. We have two gentlemen here, very bright people, called the Thackeray's, who don't want Bombay to open out to anyone who's not from Maharashtra. So we also have our fair share of dolts. But the point that I'm trying to understand is, America being so evolved, why is it going back to uncivil, brutish behavior? What's the trigger?
Well, I agree it's extremely alarming, and there is a level of bullying, brashness that has come out. You see it particularly on these Facebook posts from people who are it's really upsetting. I do think that social media is a lot to blame for this, because I think there is an unleashing and a validation that's coming from these Facebook and Twitter postings, where you can suddenly find your like-minded thug to join forces with you. And in the past, you would feel a little, reticent about expressing some of those views, the ugly American, the idea of it. But now the ugly American reigns. And I think it's a little to do with what we said at the beginning about feeling left behind and feeling patronized and feeling angry. It's absolutely amplified, however, by social media. And now we have a president who says the things that people used to say to themselves in bars quietly, hoping nobody overheard them. I mean, Trump has validated using in the public space the kind of ugly rhetoric that you have never heard before on an election campaign. I mean, he said every day things that would have got you absolutely excluded in past years. The interesting thing is how it didn't get him excluded. And I think it's the most fascinating thing about this election, how nothing ever landed a punch on Trump. I mean, it's not true to say that the media fawned on him, actually, although I would argue that the media did not turn to exposing him until the last third of the campaign, at which point it was too late. He'd already won at that point, because he'd got in there and got into people's heads and overtaken them. But in the first third, 2/3, he was treated as entertainment. He was covered as a joke. He was covered as an amusing ratings diversion. It was a critical mistake because, the wolf was into the pen without really people understanding. But the social media piece of it is truly ugly, and I find very, very scary, because you're now seeing misogyny greatly on the increase. I mean, the things that you can say about women just seem to be limitless, and there isn't any redress. And nothing that he did made a difference, nothing.
Tell me from your position, and so Tina Brown has an organization which does the Women in the World summits, and there was one last year in Delhi and in London and of course in New York. You've been a traveler through various journeys of media, from print to online to now events. What do you see changing in the world of media?
Well, I'm just dying, frankly, for one of these geniuses in Silicon Valley to invent a business model that allows journalism to flourish again. Because I'm very, very concerned about a world without media, without proper media. I mean, we have the alt-right, as it's called now, which is spewing out all of this fallacious propaganda. without the checks and balances. I mean, there are 40% fewer actual reporters covered this last election. They've all been laid off. They've all been fired. I mean, and right after the election, you saw another horrible culling. I mean, you know, a lot of it, news organizations took on journalists for the election, and then they laid them all off again. So you had hundreds of people being laid off from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, a network like Fusion just closed. I mean, it's very alarming that the actually professionalized journalist is more and more unable to earn a living. And I definitely think it's hurting democracy and the policing of democracy tremendously. We're also seeing something which is very alarming, which is that, you know, Trump doesn't feel he needs to use that media at all. I mean, doesn't feel the need to answer questions. I was interested in Rajdeep yesterday saying that politicians here now don't really feel the need to answer any questions. I mean, they don't need to go on television and be asked questions. In Britain, for instance, it always strikes me that actually there is more of that because of the BBC, people feel that they have to go on the BBC and get a bit of a pummeling, as we do in a Prime Minister's question time. But, you know, in America now, I mean, it was true of Hillary Clinton. She went about 250 days without giving a press conference, frankly, because she was afraid of the email scandals being asked. But Trump doesn't feel the need to go on and be asked any questions. I mean, he goes on and he blows off steam and everybody covers the rallies and they cover everything he does and they ask one question and a follow-up, and after the follow-up has been blown off, that's it for him. Otherwise, he'll never come back on the show. And of course, he's now just using social media and YouTube to do his talking, and he's basically, I don't think the press corps will exist anymore at the end of his presidency. And that is a very, very concerning thing, you know, because the press are supposed to be there as watchdogs.
But could there be a reason that the press also often from watchdog morphs into lapdog?
Yes.
Which means, you know, they're willing to align themselves to either right-wing thought, left-wing thought. We've seen the whole debate on Fox. I mean, you talk about misogyny. What happened there was utterly despicable. Do you believe large sections of the media have lost their independence because there's so much of big money involved today?
Absolutely. I don't think. I think that the corporate ownership of media has done as much to damage media as digital explosions. I really do. You just get fired if you offend an advertiser. And you're seeing more and more that the digital channels which do news, they're really willing to do anything to get the advertising. You don't know the difference between a, quote, sponsored post and a post that's actually real. It's a blurring to the point that you just don't know, and people don't want to lose their access. When it comes to television, you get absolutely no points for having an empty chair at the interview, right? So, I mean, if Donald Trump won't come on, you have an empty chair. So, you're left with, do you ask the softball and have him on the show and get the ratings, or do you have an empty chair? If you're a moderator with an empty chair every time, you're not going to get any points. So this is the thing, access journalism on the one hand, and on the other, the fear, the weakness of the press financially has meant that sponsors and advertisers reign. I mean, a few years back, an advertiser was in awe of the editor. It was like the editor could say, well, I'm not doing that. That's a freebie. That's asking for sponsorship. I'm not doing it. It's not what I do. I'm an editor. That is really gone. And more editors just simply have to play ball or they don't last.
But could it also be that the people who are supposed to report the news have become the news themselves? Where the anchors or editors, so I've often said, I mean, there is a very, very shy, almost underground editor of the Times of India who's sitting here, who doesn't ever want stardom, but then you have lines and lines of editors of various newspapers who are on television when they should be actually editing their newspapers, where television anchors become the news themselves. So do you believe that the media has finally learnt also the art of celebrity?
I do. I mean, I definitely agree with you that there are many editors who would rather be at the event, rather be in there mixing with the celebrities and getting the exposure than asking the tough questions. But I also do think, in fairness to them, that they're under a lot of pressure. I really do, where to just simply get the ratings, get the traffic, and if they don't get any points. So I hear you about the celebrity, but I think it's more there are more journalists who want just to be allowed to get on and be journalists. I also think journalists are tormented by the amount they have to do without any remuneration. I mean, I'm surrounded by journalists saying, I can't stand it, I'm being asked to post and tweet and Facebook Live and pin and this and post. I mean, they just want to get on with their journalism. You know, they're made to post 3 or 4 times a day before their thoughts are even lined up, rather than spend those same 2 hours on the phone reporting. So I'm afraid I'm kind of on the side of the journalists on this one.
Let's come closer home. You've been coming to India so often. What excites you? What depresses you?
Well, what I love about India, so much, I mean, obviously, physically, I adore this country the way it is, but I love the disputatiousness of Indians. I mean, I love the argumentativeness of Indians, and I actually do think, you know, when I come here, everybody's wringing their hands and saying the media is so terrible. As far as I'm concerned, you still have a really fabulous plural print press. Many more newspapers, much higher level of literacy in many places like Kerala and so on. And when I say the literacy, I actually mean interest in the news. I mean, I often have discussions about the American election with Indians, which is way more informed than half the people I talk to in America. I think, how do you know so much about the American elections? I mean, if you ask people about what's happening in India, in New York or wherever, whatever, they have the smallest idea compared to what Indians say about America in a really informed and interesting way. So I love the disputatiousness, I love the plural media, I love the willingness to engage in argument and ideas, which I find so thriving. Obviously, the extreme, the extreme gap between rich and poor is often very stressful to even be around in that sense. I mean, it's upsetting sometimes to see that, and longing for that moment to come when, you know, there is a less of a huge gap. And it amazes me that even though progress has been made, that it's still so dire in so many places, and that these two things can coexist. But this is not a new thought.
Okay, on that note, we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So please ask any questions that you wish to of Tina.
Or Suhel. God, so loud. Or Suhel.
Oh, yeah, okay. I thought there was someone in the audience. I almost like...
This is somebody here.
No, just some quick rules. Please identify yourself, means your name, and just ask a question. No speeches, yeah? Thank you. No, 1 minute. Just wait for the mic.
Hello. Yeah.
Now you're very loud.
Thank you very much. Tina and Suhel Seth, it's a pleasure to see you early this morning, Sunday. Tina, I fire a question straight to you. Tina Brown, you are so spontaneous woman. You speak so much from your heart. It's a blessing that we have journalists or media barons like you. And thank you, Suhel. Tina, haven't you ever felt maddening in your career, or isn't it a mania, a sort of so much work in your life? So much, I mean, is it a part of your celibacy, or just because is it a part of your business?
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I haven't understood the question, so I'm sure Tina hasn't either. But thank you for asking it. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, I just wanted to say, ain't you overworked? To see, he asked you...
Okay, we got it, sir.
What makes you happy?
Basically...
What makes you depressed?
Yeah, 1 minute. Just... I will also signal to you when you can switch the mics off, okay, guys, at the back. So basically, he wants to know if you're tired.
I'm never tired around Suhel Seth. How's that?
There you are.
Yeah, my name is Jawahar Tadani. There are two developments which are happening in the media. One is something known as post-truth, and the other is fake news. What is your opinion on these trends which are happening? How serious are they for media?
I think they're really, really frightening trends. And what is interesting is that even Trump's own surrogates now are kind of owning it and saying, yes, people have their own facts, but they're entitled to, which is really a new idea. And a very, very alarming one, because, you know, as Obama was saying recently, you know, you used to have a certain body of facts and opinion on which to have an argument. Like if 90% of scientists say that climate change is real, you can go forward and have an argument about what to do about climate change so that you can, you know, have a policy discussion about how to go forth. If you can't even decide that the facts are real, you can't have any kind of policy discussion. So actually it's a paralyzing trend, and one which is gaining traction because of the news feeds that people self-select on Facebook, so that you can, I mean, I have had amazing conversations with people in America who honestly believe, for instance, that Hillary Clinton is a murderer, that she had Vince Foster, one of her advisors in the first Clinton administration, murdered, that she is a person who had somebody, there was a death of an FBI agent, I think it was a suicide or whatever, but that, you know, that she had this person killed so that they wouldn't be involved with her email judgment. I mean, you're looking at this person and you're saying, where do you get your information from? I mean, how could you possibly think such a thing? And they go, well, I know it's true. I'm reading this on my news feed, and you're thinking, this is how dangerous it is, that you can honestly poison an entire section of the electorate about people with lies. And the lies that were told about Hillary in this election were so intense that, you know, people honestly believe the woman is a felon and a crook. So excessive and so distressing to her, I'm sure, as she looks back on what on earth has come of her legacy. Where is her legacy at this point? Everything is destroyed. So it's a very, very frightening business.
You know, it's interesting you mention it. If you see the hashtag Crooked Hillary, which started trending, you see all the stuff. We have a very, very robust election commission in India, which would have slammed people who would have made these, or who would have cast aspersions of the kind that Trump did. I'm surprised that America, being so evolved and having had more elections than we've had, doesn't have a system in place to check slander of the kind that we saw.
Well, it is very interesting, very, very interesting point, and I think that something has to happen on this. I mean, obviously we deify free speech, rightly so, but what happens when free speech is truly, you know, ruining a reputation like this? And I think it's a very interesting thing to consider about how we can stop this happening. I mean, there are many, many things springing up now to fact check. But again, it's like, well, you read this on your fact check site, but why should I check your fact check site? My fact check site says something different. I mean, it's chaos.
Yes, sir.
Tina, what you have said about the white underclass is quite true. I have lived in Texas for 40 years, so I'm quite familiar with that. And I've also written for the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and I read New York Times and New Yorker and all that.
Sir, name and question, biography in the next session.
Okay. My name is Fazlur Rahman.
Our question ta bolun taratari.
Okay. My question is that what is the intellectual scene, the history of this intellectual scene under President Trump in the US now? What will happen to the intellectual scene in the US under President Trump?
Okay, got it.
What will happen to the intellectual scene? Well, I mean, I think intellectuals are regrouping, trying very hard to understand what's happened, actually. I mean, there's a massive attempt right now just to understand what happened, and quite a lot of self-flagellation is going on for those who, quote, missed the story. One of the things that I find very interesting is, personally, I think that data has become way too deified. In the case, for instance, of the polling and the Hillary Clinton's campaign, you had a situation, for instance, where in Hillary's campaign, they had all the data. You can have the data and miss the story, because the story is the human element that runs, you know, subterraneanly and through, and isn't shown necessarily in the data as such. So that is why, and Bill Clinton, by the way, is very much a man of the story. He's pre-digital for a start, and he has a navel for what's happening in the real visceral world. And he constantly warned his wife's campaign, there is something going on in white working class America you're missing, and was blown off by the pointy-headed nerds in his wife's campaign saying, no, our data says that we have, Pennsylvania wrapped, we have Michigan wrapped. And he was saying, well, these counties, I don't know, it's not looking good. And he was right. And he was doing that purely on gut, not on data. And that's my biggest lesson to the intellectuals, if you like, which is stop being so obsessed with the data and start going back to the story.
Yes, sir.
I'm Hemant Naik Naure. The question is, have the costs in the last 2 decades gone up in the media, or is it just the competition? Why is it that the media can't be impartial anymore?
Very good question. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the media is not. Well, what does impartial mean? I mean, sometimes you don't want to be impartial. You want to tell the truth, which comes down on the other side. I mean, media is just weakened financially. And when you're weak, you can't take anybody on. You can't take on a bully when you haven't any troops to fight, or when you feel, that you're going to get fired, or that you can't stand up to the advertiser, and you can't, because you don't want to lose that bit of advertising you still have left. We're seeing a huge flight from print media and from news media. No, advertisers don't want to advertise around news. They don't want to advertise around news. It's wars and deaths and politics. That's not what they want to place their brands against. They want to put their brands against, cooking and luxury and all the things that are not to do with news. So that's why they're not standing up, because it's very often the truth is gritty, the truth isn't commercial, the truth is uncomfortable. And there's also a fear of the clash. You see, I'm a big enthusiast for the clash, debate, which is what I like about India. People like to come out and have debate, and they argue in the public space about things. There's whole conversations that you can't really have because, frankly, of political correctness and a fear of the flying soundbite that's going to get you into trouble. And in that sense, Trump did, again, strike a nerve, because political correctness has got to the point that you can't have a conversation about immigration or misogyny or all these things that you want to have unless you come down on a particular point of view, without getting so much flack for it that you're called all these insulting terms and your career blows up. I mean, how many CEOs or whatever have we seen lose their jobs because a bit of a soundbite comes out? For instance, I mean, here's a soundbite that killed Hillary. She went to Pennsylvania and she says, I'm going to take away coal. And she then said, and give you energy jobs, solar energy jobs. The soundbite was, I'm going to take away coal. Yeah. And she lost. All the coal miners. I mean, that became the thing that killed her in coal country because of that half a soundbite that killed her.
My theory, I'm maybe completely wrong, I'm no soothsayer, where the establishment turns brutish, people will return to books with greater vigor. Because since they can't engage in the real world, they'll engage with books, with thoughts that they could have empathy with. So I believe intellectualism, when there is terrible society disruption, actually takes to the fore. And if you look at Indian history, at the same time as we were marching against the British, as it were, we had the reformist movement. There was Swami Vivekananda there was Aurobindo, there was the Arya Samaj, Ram Mohan Roy, Tagore. So we saw parallel universes of intellectualism actually providing succor and solace to a society that was torn asunder. So, I hope intellectualism remains.
I think you're so right, though, about that. I mean, there is a reason why there are 90 literary festivals in India, right? I mean, I actually totally agree that the more people become isolated on their screens and brutalized by debate or lack of it, they want to hear it. And so they're going to go out to these intellectual forums and hopefully return to books. That's maybe too big a hope.
Yes, please.
My name is Professor Sitesh Dutt. An enigma which I have is Hillary wins all 3 debates, public debates, and loses. Is this the end of debating for the presidency? This is my question. Tina's views.
Very good.
Very good question. I mean, it is staggering. She was superb in the debates. There were actually 4 times that Hillary was absolutely superb. The 3 debates, and in the hearings when the Congress grilled her on Benghazi, where she had 7 hours of absolutely hostile questioning from the Republicans and never lost her temper and was absolutely, had her facts marshaled and, You could not see a more amazing thing. Those were the only 4 times that she was ever allowed to finish a sentence in the entire campaign. The rest of the time it was about her emails, her emails, her emails. She really didn't have a chance to ever show who she was. She never got covered compared to Trump, whose every single rally, I mean, in CNN you would have the anchor talking and in the corner Trump's rally for the entire broadcast, because that was a show that people wanted to watch. So this is the agony. Hillary, we all agree, she was amazing in the debates. That wasn't the kind of entertainment that America seems to want. They want entertainment. They want their president to be entertaining. So now we have to accept that we are living in a reality show and not be a snob about it. I mean, at the end of the day, the next Democratic candidate has to be a show that somebody wants to watch. Obviously, people wanted to watch the Obama show. He was an unbelievably charismatic, sui generis orator and performer and charmer. Very hard, probably once in a lifetime kind of performer. Most politicians don't have that kind of charisma. And when people talk about the next Democratic candidate, I'm thinking, how can they even imagine that that's a show that anybody wants to watch? Hillary chose Tim Kaine, the governor of Virginia, to be her vice presidential pick. When she did that, I just threw my hands up in despair. The guy is a square, a boring white dude. I mean, just a non-entity in terms of, I mean, probably very brilliant and a marvelous whatever, but it was just a boring show that nobody wanted to watch. She would have been much better off having somebody like, the black senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, who at least could, be a crowd pleaser. So I think being an entertainer now is incredibly important, and rational argument. I mean, Trump was an absolute dud in those debates. It was ludicrous in our view, but not to the lovers of Trump who were just cheering every step of the way.
I think before Michelle or Hillary, Kim Kardashian might be the first female president that America has.
Yeah.
You're like going down a path of complete intellectual innocence. The lady, sir, always,
one way
we
to
are
put
from
it.
Calcutta, the lady first. The lady and then you, sir.
Thank you. My name's Sharon Marcus, and we
Hi, Sharon.
haven't yet talked about the very controversial tape in which Trump was heard, however we can put it euphemistically, advocating sexual assault, bragging about having committed it. There's been a lot of analysis about why white women, many of them, voted for him despite that tape. I'd be interested in hearing you talk about why you think white men voted for him despite that tape.
Unfortunately, I think white men, maybe are less perturbed by it than one might expect. What I am more surprised about is what you said firstly about the women. And I did ask that question when I was in Texas recently, in San Antonio, where there was a wide support for Trump. And I asked 2 or 3 of the women that I met there. We were doing one of our Women in the World summits there, and there were many women working the event, and I asked all of them why when they said they'd voted for Trump, which they did, why this tape hadn't bothered them. And it's very interesting. They said the same thing. They said, it's locker room talk. One of them said to me, my 3 brothers are footballers. They all talk like that. It was no big deal. He didn't mean it. They said, we got upset when all these kind of people in New York, as they put it, jumped around and said, how terrible it was, and they went on and on about it for 2 weeks. We knew that it wasn't really serious, and it was annoying to us. And then one of them went on and said, Trump got a lot of anger and outrage because he was offensive to one of his Miss Universe contestants, the Venezuelan Miss Universe, who he called Miss Piggy, said put on too much weight, put on 16 pounds, and Hillary used it effectively in her debate and said, this is the way you talk about a woman because she put on some weight, you fat-shamed her and you called her. But actually, one of the women in Texas said to me, you can't go into a beauty contest and put on weight. It's like, what was she thinking? So I said, well, he was very offensive. And she said, well, he had right on his side. He had right on his side. And I thought, well, maybe we're too obsessed with the, quote, microaggressions and didn't see the macroaggression barreling towards us, which was the successful Donald Trump. It seemed like the women that I spoke to in the heartland, as it were, they are used to boorish sexist behavior as an occupational hazard, perhaps, and feel that his economic message was more important. These are the things that we're turning around now and thinking, how do we process them?
You know, I still believe that the two oft-quoted myths are that women will vote for a woman candidate, never been proven. And number two, this whole locker room business is actually indicative of that person's real mind. Locker room is just a tactic to kind of embellish your soul and pretend that you're a noble person. I mean, if this is what these people really feel in a locker room, can you imagine that's the realism that they have? I mean, you know,
and indeed that you're living with it, the women are living with
Yeah.
it. I know.
yes, sir.
My name is Bhupinder, and this question is Suhel, and then Tina can follow it. I think my question is partly answered, but I'll still just put it up. Did Hillary lose because of the gender, that she was a woman, and did Bill also bring her down?
About Bill bringing her down, I mean, you know, but I think she'd be better equipped to answer this question.
Well, I definitely think, as I said before, that I think that the misogyny towards Hillary and this woman of power had been scarring to her, so she entered with the barnacles and the wounds of being a woman in the first place. There's no doubt that women in power get covered far more negatively than men do. And in fact, Rockefeller recently did a study which proved that, in fact, incontrovertibly by analyzing the news reports about male CEOs versus women CEOs. Women, beyond any measure, get much more negative coverage. Interesting as well, when they get fired, Fortune 500 CEOs who are women never get hired again. They don't get hired again. They have not, there was no point where a woman who'd been fired, who supposedly had failed at her company, ever got hired again, whereas the men often got other jobs as CEOs. So there's no doubt there is that with regard to Hillary. I do think for Hillary, the Bill question was very, very hard for her. I mean, the sad thing for Hillary was feminists hated Hillary of a certain generation for having stood by Bill Clinton in the first place. She got no points for being stoic in her marriage vows at all, none. And then in the election with Trump, he kept bringing up very effectively that she'd been his, quote, enabler, which was pretty cruel given the amount of pain she'd suffered in that situation, that she was his enabler, that she had gone after the women who had been unfaithful for her own political gain, and then produces like 5 gargoyles on a battlement, the ex-mistresses of the, these women who are like, had all sued Bill Clinton for various times, fueled by Republican money and, moments in the sun. And, there they were all sitting in her, looking at him accusatorily. And it was absolutely horrendous for her, really, to have to sort of undergo this. But then what does she do? So she can't go after Trump for the hideous tape that Sharon Marcus just mentioned, which was so appalling. Really, I mean, she did a bit, but she couldn't much, because his retaliation was, look, I was saying those things, bragging in a locker room. Your husband did far worse in the Oval Office, and you stayed with him. So what's the problem? And that was very, very hard for her. She dealt with it, I think, with enormous dignity, which is really by sort of saying nothing and having Michelle Obama go out and do the really effective speech about how horrible that tape was, because she couldn't do that speech. But, again, as the candidate, it was a moment of emotional connection which she couldn't make because she couldn't talk about her husband. Michelle Obama did an amazing speech on it, but it accrued to Michelle Obama, not to Hillary. So, I mean, when you look back on Hillary as a candidate, you have to say, oh my God, the amount of things that she had to overcome to run. And I wrote, in 2014, I wrote a column actually saying, don't run. I think she would have been much better off not running the second time. I think there was too much baggage for her to ever have to overcome, even though I think she would have been an amazing president and fully qualified. Given where we are in life, it was very hard for her to win.
The last question. Yes, ma'am. See, that's why, when you tell me everything is fine, I always worry the most.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm retired Lieutenant Colonel Bakshi from the Indian Army. Now, our topic for this morning was, does media change the world? And I think we've discussed America more than the world. My question is, media is a reflection of what is happening around the world. It is supposed to be a fourth pillar of democracy. And a lot is happening around us, and a common person wants to know the truth. There's a lot happening in Syria, there's lots happening in the other parts of the world. So how do you see this? Is the media shaping the destiny of the world and the nation? Or is it just talking only about Triumph and Hillary or Modi in India?
Okay.
So I would like to have a comment on that.
Well, listen,
Before Tina starts, I must apologize, but we've been trained in India never to stick to a topic. And it was also important to have Tina, given who she is, to actually talk about American politics, and she did reflect on the role of the media there, but I apologize for not being loyal to the topic. But then disloyalty as moderators is a virtue.
well, here's what you're speaking to the converted. I mean, I created this conference called Women in the World because I want to hear from women all over the world, voices that tell me what's happening. And we created Women in the World to tell the stories of what is happening on the front lines of everywhere through the voices of women and through their narratives. Because I have of the opinion that people don't listen to issues and they don't listen to foreign news, but they will listen to a story. So we'll tell a story of what is happening in Aleppo through the voices of a woman who has been trapped there, and then people start to get engaged. Or a Yazidi girl who I featured recently who was escaped ISIS as a sex slave, and she made everyone in the room cry and care about who the hell the Yazidis are, who most people don't even know who they are. And I think that it's critical. It's why I'm doing it. And the reason I'm doing it as a live platform is because there's no ability to do it on television or in print, because traffic and ratings are driven by emotion, shock, instant sort of, again, sensation, and they're not driven by foreign coverage, a long story about what's happening in Aleppo. People just are not. Unfortunately, they don't listen, and and it's agonizing because obviously something I care hugely about. There was a hideous moment on American television, on cable television, when the independent candidate, who's irrelevant, but I mean he was still on television. They were discussing. They were about to have a conversation. Something had happened in Syria, and he said, "What's Aleppo?" He didn't know what Aleppo. He was running for president and had never heard of Aleppo. And it became a kind of, to me, it would have been like the mantra of this election. What's Aleppo? There were no questions about Syria in the debate. None of them. 4 debates. Nobody asked about it. And it's going on, 250,000 people have been killed, and nobody is writing about it, or except in the kind of foreign coverage of the Times, which people are not really reading. It has absolutely no interest. And this is the great tragedy that we have, which is that if media is only going to be driven by emotion and sensation and traffic, you will never get any more foreign coverage. I mean, it's somewhat better in the UK because of the BBC, actually, because the BBC doesn't depend on that, and therefore they can, cover foreign stories. But CNN has virtually abandoned it. I mean, Christian Amanpour, their greatest sort of foreign correspondent, doesn't have a show on the American network, which is really an amazing thing. She wins all the prizes when there are prizes given out to journalists, but actually she doesn't have a show in America because it is deemed that nobody gives a damn about what is happening in Boko Haram in Africa, with the terrorism, or what is going on in Libya, or none of these things. People are not interested. So I think that somehow it's up to it's up to readers, it's up to people to demand it. I mean, how we get over this hump, I don't know.
I mean, it's a somber note to end on, but I think in all the hurried times we live in, scholarship has been given the go-by. You don't want to reflect on a poem when you can actually use a 140-letter extract and post it on Twitter. So, we are abridging everything. We are abridging our souls. We are abridging our minds. It's the abridged version of humanity that you're seeing. So you'll pull out one line from Julius Caesar, another line from King Lear, and marry the two, and then become an expert on Shakespeare. So I still believe that there's fundamentally something wrong with the way we are bringing up children in only one area, that is the respect for letters, the respect for scholarship. And if that doesn't change, we are in terrible times because, you know, I worry when young people say Homer is irrelevant or Shakespeare is irrelevant or Keats is passé. But they don't even know contemporary authors, other than, you know, famous authors like Chetan Bhagat, who are brilliant scholars of the English language. But other than that, I don't know where the hell we're headed. But on that delightful note, Tina, this actually reminded me, sorry to use the American example again, Lieutenant Colonel, of the fireside chats that Roosevelt used to have. Civilized conversation in a civilized environment, sponsored by very civilized sponsors and presented by a very civilized newspaper. Thank you for being a delightful audience. Tina, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You have a splendid Sunday.
Thank you.